Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies. And today we're going to be talking about 20 of the absolute best movies currently on Netflix. So, like usual on this channel, this is a list of 20 movie recommendations currently available on Netflix, but whereas I normally point out movies that you likely have never heard of, this is going to be 20 movies you probably have, but that you probably also forgot how good they are. And also, unlike usual, I'm going to talk a little bit more about these movies. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth, talk about some behind the scenes things to get you a little more interested in revisiting some movies you've likely seen before, especially when we get to my top 10. That's where I'm going to kind of geek out on some of these great movies, tell you some things you've probably never heard before. But let's start this list off all the way at the back with probably the least familiar movie on this list, Rush. This movie's already almost 10 years old. It was directed by Ron Howard, stars Chris Hemsworth, Olivia Wilde, and Daniel Bruhl, who was just coming off his success with Inglourious Basterds. This is also written by Peter Morgan, who's famous for having written movies like The Last King of Scotland, The Queen, and Frost Nixon. So great, snappy dialogue, but also some amazing racing scenes. This is directed by Ron Howard, and it's one of the best movies I think he's done in the last 10 years or so. I mean, Ron Howard has some incredible movies in his filmography, and I consider Rush to be one of the most overlooked ones that he's ever done. I'm not ashamed to say that Mars Attacks went way over my head back when it came out, but that was because I was 12 years old. Nowadays, I think this is just a movie lover's dream. It's one of my favorite Tim Burton movies because it has so much fun with the sci-fi genre, specifically movies that came out in the 50s and 60s. And Mars Attacks does a great job of poking fun at a lot of the silliness from those movies, but in a very affectional way. I mean, you can tell Tim Burton loves those movies, and he's not doing a parody of them to point out how awful they are. He's doing a parody to point out kind of how magical that era was for sci-fi movies. And in addition to that, it is just a funny, wild movie, completely packed to the gills with some of Hollywood's top talent. I mean, Jack Nicholson, 1996 Pierce Brosnan, which was pretty top tier Pierce Brosnan. You've also got Sarah Jessica Parker, Annette Bening, Glenn Close, Danny DeVito, Martin Short, and Michael J. Fox. And then you've got small roles from people like Natalie Portman, Pam Grier, and Jack Black. I know I already mentioned Jack Nicholson, but he plays two roles, which is another thing I didn't get when I was 12. I mean, I would not have said this at the time when I was 12, but now, 25 years later, I would easily put this movie above Independence Day, which came out around the same time. But speaking of 90s action movies, Cliffhanger, I think, is one of Stallone's most overlooked movies, or at least underrated ones. Now, don't get me wrong, it does have an audience, it did do fairly well at the box office, but it was also kind of panned critically when it was released, because it does have some silliness to it, and you've got actors like John Lithgow, who typically do a really good job, that seem a little bit campy here, so this movie does hit and miss at times, but Cliffhanger is completely packed with stunts. Big ones, real ones, stuff that was not done in CGI, things stuntmen are really putting their lives on the line for. And Cliffhanger was released in 1993, and to this day, it still holds a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most expensive aerial stunt ever done in a movie. There's a moment early on where some people and packages are trying to move from one plane to another across a cable. A lot of what you see in this scene was done for real with real stunt people. It cost about $1 million, and again, still holds a place in the Guinness Book of World Records, even with inflation. There's a long-running rumor that Jason Momoa is cast in a remake, but COVID messed up production with everything, so that movie has yet to begin production, and it may never actually get made, but I do think it's a movie deserving of a modern-day remake, especially if they do it well. If it's been a while since you've seen it, I guarantee you forgot how cool Cliffhanger is. Now for a cool movie for the entire family that's from one of the coolest directors of all time, Robert Rodriguez, who does some really intense, adult-oriented movies, one of which, actually two, are featured later on this list, but one for the whole family is Spy Kids. Now, Robert Rodriguez is famous for putting a lot of money on the screen, or at least making it look like a lot of money on screen, which means his movies look a lot more expensive than they actually were to make. Since the very beginning of his directing career, he was always doing these sort of rogue things that were allowing him to make movies on lower budgets, but that were still really visually impressive and entertaining to watch. That's a big thing with Robert Rodriguez, is he never forgets to be entertaining, and Spy Kids is filled with props, stunts, all sorts of gadgets and gimmicks, and it is a funny movie for kids to watch, and I enjoy watching it with my kids. It does get a little zany, a little bonkers at times, even a little creepy for really young kids, but my kids love it. And again, me loving Rodriguez's more adult-centered movies, I can see sort of a parallel, even though his kid-friendly movies are vastly different. He's done quite a few Spy Kids movies and other family-friendly movies over the years, including We Can Be Heroes, which is a Netflix original. That's a decent watch for the kids, but I still consider Spy Kids to be the best movie he ever did for families. All right, my next pick is not for the family. There's not too many more for the family on this list. There's a few, but my next one might be director Clint Eastwood's second best movie he ever did in the director's chair. I'm talking about $1 Million Baby. Now, this is one that when it was released, I didn't really care too much about it. I don't think a lot of people care too much about it, and it became an instant classic. And it's easy to forget just how good $1 Million Baby actually is. Now, it's very much of a downer of a movie, it's very somber, it can be very depressing, making it not the most rewatchable movie Clint Eastwood's ever done, but it's got some of the best performances in a Clint Eastwood movie, which says a lot. I mean, he's worked with most of some of the greatest actors to ever perform on screen, but in this movie you get an amazing performance from Morgan Freeman. It's one of my favorite ones he's done this century. Obviously, Hilary Swank is great in it, but I think a lot of people thought she maybe had her 15 minutes with Boys Don't Cry, came back years later and did this and did an amazing job. Clint Eastwood is good in it, as good as he is in everything, but then you also got like good character actors in this that are killing it. Michael Peña's in this, Anthony Mackie is in it, and then Margot Martindale, who you see in a ton of stuff. She plays the mother. I think this is maybe her best role ever, which says a lot with the amount of work that she's done. So this movie just hits on all cylinders. But the problem with $1 Million Baby is that you do need to be in the right mood, because it is going to put you in a bad one, and you want to make sure you're at least a little bit resilient to that before you watch this one. All right, we're gonna go back to the action genre with my next pick, but this one's not all out action. This one's actually got a lot of political intrigue. It's got some thriller elements with clear and present danger. This is one of my favorite Tom Clancy movies. There are a ton of them. I happen to like this one. I would even argue that it's probably not the best Tom Clancy movie. There are certainly better ones, but Clear and Present Danger has so many elements that I absolutely love. This is part of the Jack Ryan series. I've always felt Harrison Ford was maybe the best Jack Ryan. He felt a little more realistic and less of an action hero, which I think works for this story and Patriot Games. But in Clear and Present Danger, you also get this great role from Willem Dafoe, and then you get some of the other commandos like Raymond Cruz and Benjamin Bratt. James Earl Jones has a small but very important role. He is fantastic in this. And then you get these incredible action sequences. You get the one with all the white Suburbans and the rocket launchers. There's the missile strike scene. And today it's very difficult to appreciate how slow printers used to be, but there's a scene with a printer that is one of the most tense scenes in this entire movie. And then as you get to the climax, you do get this really wild adventure action type thing that kind of seems to come out of nowhere, yet it manages to work. Harrison Ford did such a great job with the character that you buy him being in this position that he probably would have never found himself in. So I just really enjoy watching this one. This is one of those movies I could put on almost any time, at any point in the movie, and I'm going to enjoy it and finish it. Now, because this list is really just trying to go for the best of what's on Netflix right now, I don't have a lot of comedies on the list. I find comedies to be not as rewatchable unless they're just really, really good, but one of the best ones on Netflix right now that is so rewatchable is Chef. Now, I know this one was wildly popular when it was released, unusually so for such a small movie. Trust me, if you've never seen Chef, it is going to make you hungry. This is the story of a sort of celebrity chef that gets booted from a restaurant and starts to reboot his career with a food truck. I know that's not the most interesting plot line you've ever heard, but what makes this really interesting to me is it's directed by Jon Favreau, who is a big-time director, has done a ton of movies, but the story here is very similar to his experience with the Iron Man series. So real quick, the backstory there is Jon Favreau directed Iron Man, the first one, and Iron Man 2. And Iron Man was, I believe, the first or one of the first movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and was and still is largely considered one of the best made, whereas Iron Man 2 is considered to be among the worst. So after directing the second one, he left the Marvel movies, went away, did this movie, and has since worked his way back up with Disney, doing The Jungle Book, The Lion King, and The Mandalorian. And there is a sequence of scenes with the restaurant owner, Dustin Hoffman, and you can clearly see this is Jon Favreau kind of working out this battle he must have had with movie producers and his creativity as a director. I think it's really cool to see it come to life in this theatrical setting of this restaurant. And then you get this great father-son bonding thing. John Leguizamo has an amazing role in it. Yes, it has its ups and downs. There is foul language in it. It's almost family friendly, if not for all the F-bombs, but really just a broadly appealing movie. I can't imagine there's many people watching this video that would not thoroughly enjoy Chef. Now we're gonna dial the clock all the way back to 1986 with my next pick, Labyrinth. Now this one stars a young Jennifer Connelly and David Bowie, and only Jennifer Connelly and David Bowie, because everyone else is either a puppet or in some sort of puppeted costume. Now this is obviously a Jim Henson movie, but this one was also directed by Jim Henson and really stands out as one of the more unusual things in the Jim Henson catalog, I guess we'll say. This one and Dark Crystal both really sort of stand out as the weirder but more interesting ones he ever did. And obviously Labyrinth has held up as a cult classic, but I can tell you I recently rewatched it with my entire family. My kids were still into this movie. It's got an amazing look to it because everything you see, almost everything you see on camera, is in camera. It's got real light hitting it, it's real textures, everything looks real. And the puppetry work, keep in mind, this is 1986. This is almost 30 years ago when they were making this thing, or at least when they started planning it and building these costumes, was almost 30 years ago, and this stuff looks incredible. It really is a shame that that's kind of a lost art. I wish movies were still mixing in some of the practical effects you see in this movie, but every single scene has a new elaborate set, and almost every single sequence looks totally convincing. There's one scene that doesn't hold up in my opinion, but outside of that, a really impressive watch and just kind of an amazing story too. It's a great one to go back and revisit with the family if you haven't done that yet. Okay, my number 12 pick is another family-friendly pick, and it is the last family-friendly one on this list, but it's also the one and only family-friendly movie from director Martin Scorsese. So obviously Martin Scorsese is known for movies like Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, The Wolf of Wall Street, stuff kids should stay far away from, but Hugo is not only his only family-friendly movie, it's also one of his most beautiful movies. This largely takes place in a Paris train station that was a real set. It's got a beautiful, beautiful color palette and a bunch of really interesting characters packed into this small space. I talked a little bit about practical effects where this movie looks amazing because the sets are real, but a lot of the look that you see in Hugo was enhanced with computer graphics. To me, this is a great example of how the two can work together really well and not come off as fake or patched or unconvincing. The world of Hugo doesn't quite look like ours. It looks a little bit imaginary, a little bit more wonderful and beautiful, but that wasn't just done to make the movie look good. It serves a purpose for the story that's being told. You also get amazing performances, not just from the child actors in this, but you get a great role from Ben Kingsley, one of the favorite things I've seen him do in a long time. Sacha Baron Cohen has a really interesting role in this that I think works great for him. But in typical Martin Scorsese style, every single scene is just top-notch, incredibly well executed. It's hard to find movies that are better crafted than Martin Scorsese movies, and Hugo is just another fantastic example of that. And now as we're at my number 11 pick and then we go into my top 10, there are going to be some picks here that are not just familiar, that are modern day classics. My number 11 pick being Training Day. So this movie obviously is a cult classic now, and not just because of Denzel Washington's performance. Now, this is where he won his first Academy Award for a leading role. I think he deserved it before that. He had so many more roles that I think were even better than this one. But his sort of over-the-top, sort of gangster cop role really stands out in this as the main thing to remember. But in addition to that, and I would say almost even better than that, is just the story. This is also the first big movie from director Antoine Fuqua, who went on to do a ton of great movies. Before this, he had only done Bait with Jamie Foxx and The Replacement Killers, two decent movies, but Training Day is one of the best cop movies ever made, and it's a type of cop movie that they're probably not going to be making, at least coming out of Hollywood, for quite some time. But Training Day is one of those examples of a movie that is greater than the sum of its parts, meaning it's better than the Denzel Washington performance. It's better than Ethan Hawke's performance, which also got an Academy Award nomination. I think it's Fuqua's best movie. I don't know that he's ever topped it, and he might never be able to. And then you've also got a lot of small roles from some people who are not great actors, like Snoop Dogg, that do great work in this movie and that their scenes work. Again, one of the best cop movies of all time, and certainly one of the best, if not the best, you're gonna find on Netflix right now. So before moving on with the top 10 on this list, I wanted to show you something I found. I was digging around, found this in a drawer. This is cologne that I have moved with I don't know how many times. Someone gave this to me when I was 18 or 19. It is still about half full because I don't wear cologne until just recently. Today's sponsor, Scentbird, has completely changed my view and my habits on it. So Scentbird is this really cool subscription service. What you do is go to the link in the description and use code VANDAM2 and you'll save 30% off your first month. And what you'll get is one of these little containers that rolls up a tube of cologne, and every month they're gonna send you a new vial of something different tailored to your specific tastes or sense of smell. Last month I got Versace Eros, which is my new favorite scent. My wife loves the smell of it on me. I like the way it smells. This month they sent me 2 more, and they come with these cards that are really great because they tell you what sort of scents are in that particular fragrance. This one is Skylar Salt Air, which has driftwood, sea salt, and seaweed in it. I can tell you, I put it on, I smell like I've been on vacation. It is fantastic. And then they also sent Dolce & Gabbana, the one for men. I guess they only have one fragrance for men. It's kind of a more traditional sort of musky, whiskey sort of smelling thing. It's a good one to put on if you're gonna wear a suit or go out to a nice dinner. I mean, they have just as many, if not more perfumes, but what is so great about it is when you go to the link in the description, they're gonna ask you to answer 3 simple questions, and that's gonna help them figure out what sort of scents to align you with, giving you a chance to try things you might not normally try. And believe it or not, this little vial, I'm almost at the end of my Versace one, it's got 140 sprays in it, and I can attest, I'm almost at the end. I have used the hell out of this thing. It's got more than you need for a month, but you're only gonna pay 15 bucks a month, and with a discount, you pay $11 for your first month. And I can tell you, vials this size, they go for 30 bucks in the store, easily. And it's incredible how expensive this stuff is, but Scentbird helps you save money and find fragrances that you might have never tried otherwise. And trust me, if you smell good, people will notice. Again, go to the link in the video description below, use code VANDAM2, you'll save 30% off your first month. I cannot recommend this service enough, but speaking of recommendations, let's move on with my top 10 recommendations on this list. Now, I've already mentioned some great directors, but as you would imagine, the top 10 on this list does feature some of my favorite directors, the first of which being David Fincher. Now, my number 10 pick is not my favorite David Fincher movie, but it's one of my favorite ones to talk about because it's one of his more overlooked movies, The Game.
No, stop the car! Stop the car! Open the door. Lock the door. Open the goddamn door!
The Game was released in 1997, 2 years after Seven, which might still hold up as David Fincher's best work. But The Game was just as well directed in my opinion. It just didn't quite hit home the way Seven did and didn't become the cult classic that Seven did. But I do think it's in a similar class. While it's not as heavy, not as brooding, it does have a lot of interesting elements to it. If you are not familiar with The Game, Michael Douglas plays a wealthy banker who is invited to participate in a game. And unlike things like Squid Game, this game is very difficult to tell whether or not it's part of your real life or not. And the movie does an excellent job of portraying that. If you really wrap your head around this one, it's a very tricky sort of magic trick thing for the movie to do to keep you guessing as much as the main character, but The Game manages to nail that to a T, so much so that you can re-watch the game knowing what the twists are, and they're almost just as good the second time around, which is extremely rare. And like all David Fincher movies, The Game looks unusually good. For a movie that came out in 1997, it looks as if it was filmed yesterday. If it's been a while since you rewatched it, trust me, even if you know what's gonna happen, The Game is still one of the best movies you could currently watch on Netflix. So we already mentioned Robert Rodriguez with Spy Kids, and I said there was another movie of his further up on this list. Not only is Desperado one of my favorite action movies of all time, but it also features one of my favorite openings in a movie ever. This movie opens up with Steve Buscemi walking into a bar to tell a story, and that story serves a purpose for the story at large in the movie. Steve Buscemi does an amazing job. He always does, but he has a lot of fun with this character, and I absolutely love every little line that he drops. It's so perfect.
Beer?
All I got is piss warm chango.
That's my brand.
He walks in to Six Blade Knife by Dire Straits, which is one of my favorite songs. I absolutely love everything about the opening sequence, and then it just rolls into this great action movie from the 90s that again was done on a fairly low budget, but looks like it cost way more money than it did. And the movie's packed with really great moments like Quentin Tarantino's bar bet joke. And let's not forget Salma Hayek's sex scene. Even if a lot of the stuff is not practical or tactical in any sense, he made sure everything looked cool. There's no point in counting bullets in this movie. They fire way more bullets than guns are able to before they reload. In fact, they only really reload when the script needed someone to have to reload for some sort of moment of tension or something like that. The way they hold their weapons is not particularly practical or tactical, but still, everything looks cool, and that's the vibe of this movie. And I like and appreciate it as much as I like and appreciate something like John Wick, which is much more tactical and precise. I like them both. They're both entertaining for different reasons. The point is, Desperado never forgets to do the one thing so many movies seem to completely forget today, and that is to be thoroughly entertaining. I'll also mention that Once Upon a Time in Mexico is also available on Netflix right now. It is a great companion to Desperado. I used to love it more. Now I do consider Desperado to be the better movie, so it makes the list, although I do recommend them both. But with a similar title, my next pick is Once Upon a Time in America. Now this is from Sergio Leone, who also did Once Upon a Time in the West and the Man with No Name trilogy. In fact, Sergio Leone has directed some of, if not the best, Westerns of all time. And while Once Upon a Time in America is not technically a Western, it's still filmed a lot like one, but it takes place in New York and has some of the most beautiful cinematography ever put to film. That is not an overstatement. You do need to be pretty patient for this one, but instead of waiting for something to happen, take in the look of this movie. Everything was set up with such precision. Almost every single shot in this movie looks like it could be a painting. It's really amazing stuff. And you've got great performances from Robert De Niro, James Woods, and Jennifer Connelly again. She makes it on this list twice. But at almost 4 hours, I believe it's about 10 minutes shy of 4 hours, this is not one that I recommend for everybody. However, if you can sit and watch a show for 8 hours, I'm not sure why you can't watch a movie for 4. However, if you don't generally like older, slower paced movies, it's not my job to twist your arm into watching Once Upon a Time in America, but if you do like classic movies and it's been a while since you've seen this one, it's well worth revisiting. All right, we're gonna switch gears in a major way, majorly, with my next pick, but in terms of laughs per minute, I think Team America is easily one of the funniest movies ever made.
He's getting away with the WMD! I got him!
And before you turn your nose up thinking I'm going after bro humor, this is from the creators of South Park, keep in mind these guys also have Academy Award nominations and multiple Tony Awards. I mean, the stuff they make is crude, rude, but incredibly clever. And Team America isn't just funny because the puppets look funny, even though that is a major part of it. Team America nails this amazing balance between poking fun at sort of this gung-ho, extreme patriotism that followed 9/11 and the hypocrisy in Hollywood. I mean, this movie takes a giant shit on a bunch of specific people in Hollywood. Something other Hollywood produced movies are never gonna do. It's just something you're not gonna see outside of this movie, which just adds an extra layer of icing on the cake with Team America. But honestly, it's got so many different kinds of laughs. It's got the crude, rude ones. It's got just laughs of just pure silliness. And then it's got really clever laughs. Again, it's some of the hypocrisy in Hollywood and just some of the weird kind of false assumptions that a lot of Americans have about other cultures and things. It's just, it's pitch perfect stuff. If you have not watched it in a while, especially if you never gave it a chance, this is comedic gold that deserves to be watched. Easily one of the funniest, if not the funniest thing you could possibly watch on Netflix right now. Another broadly appealing classic that you probably have not watched in quite a while, is What's Eating Gilbert, Grape. Now, Johnny Depp is the star here. This was sort of his follow-up to Edward Scissorhands, so he was already this emerging megastar, but Leonardo DiCaprio steals every scene he's in. And what DiCaprio does so brilliantly and beautifully in What's Eating Gilbert, Grape is he's playing someone who's mentally handicapped, and it's tricky for actors to do characters like this in a way where it doesn't look like they're mocking, or it's a tightrope walk. But in addition to all of that, keep in mind DiCaprio's incredibly young here. It's one of his first big roles, but he's also playing this character as if he's a 3-year-old. I mean, as someone who has young children, I'm not sure how this teenage boy figured out how to act like a 3-year-old, but he nailed it time and time again. It is a wonder to watch. Prior to this, he'd only done television and 2 smaller movies. This Boy's Life, which is a pretty good movie with Robert De Niro, but it's not great, and Critters 3. Yes, Leonardo DiCaprio's first movie is Critters 3, but Gilbert Grape has so many fantastic moments in it. Even if they're not all happy moments, it is just a beautiful movie that was really well done, and it's just highly rewatchable, enjoyable for so many people. It's not gonna stay on Netflix forever. If it's been a while since you've seen it, I highly recommend pursuing it before it's gone. Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favorite directors. He's easily in my top 10 in terms of directors go, and there's quite a few good movies from him on Netflix right now, including The Master and Magnolia, but far and away my favorite of his that probably will forever be, I can't imagine him topping, There Will Be Blood. Now, while this does take place in Southern California and is not based on an actual character, but is based on a lot of true events sort of woven together, this was filmed in Plano, Texas, because the oil industry changed the landscape of Southern California so much they couldn't find a place that looked the way it used to before the oil industry came to town. But not only was this filmed in Plano, Texas, No Country for Old Men was filmed at the exact same time in Plano, Texas, which is not a huge town, and had two huge movie crews trying to coexist in it at the same time. Both movies would go on to be nominated for Best Picture later that year, No Country for Old Men being the winner. And while I do love that movie and it's one of my favorites from the Coen brothers, I think There Will Be Blood is the bigger achievement in terms of cinema. Every single shot in this movie looks incredible. It all looks beautiful. Again, every single shot could be a painting. A lot of what is built in this movie was built the way that it was back then. They used a lot of antiquated tools and stuff just to go for authenticity. A lot of the way the oil derrick and stuff is set up was to old-timey specifications. And then on top of all that, just this amazing production, this incredible sort of Citizen Kane type of a story. You also get what I think is easily Daniel Day-Lewis's best performance. Now, like most people, I think Daniel Day-Lewis is a genius. I think he's had obviously some amazing roles. I'm not sure any of them, and I'm including Lincoln, My Left Foot, all of that, I'm not sure any of them are as good as There Will Be Blood. This character is its own being. He became this character. He invented him out of thin air. He's not going off of some real person. It's wild stuff to see this character come to life on screen, and it makes what would normally be sort of mundane scenes completely come to life with this energy and this intensity and also this uncomfortableness that you're just not going to get from other characters. I mean, it's an amazing thing to watch. I wish we got more movies like this. We don't need all movies to be like this. I like stupid movies too, but movies like this are very rare, which is another reason why I love this one so much. So Blade Runner: The Final Cut is one of the best cuts of one of the best sci-fi movies ever made, which earns it this spot on the list. This movie was released in 1982. That's 2 full years, 24 months before I was born. Look at all the gray on my face and head. That's how old this movie is. Point being, it still looks amazing. It's one of the best looking movies on this list, and the final cut only adds to it. There's a few shots that enhance it, but don't do too much, so there's not enough CGI or anything to make it look like it's not of its own era, so things blend in nicely. But they also just cut out some garbage stuff that the studio made them put in when the movie was released in theaters, like an unnecessary narration that doesn't add much to the story, but the studio thought we were all too stupid to understand this movie without it. The final cut doesn't have that in it. It also has a couple of clips of the dream sequence with the unicorn that helps origami sort of tie in. So this is sort of the version of this movie that works the best. But like I said, this movie can fly over your head. If you watch this one the same way that you would watch some sort of like schlocky sci-fi movie made today, you're gonna miss the essence of it, the point of it. And I'm not trying to talk about this as if it's some highbrow thing that can't be understood, but you do have to sort of lock into it and become part of the world of Blade Runner during its runtime, and I think Ridley Scott nailed that. I still hold this and Alien up as 2 of his best movies ever made and 2 of the best science fiction movies ever made. It's easy to take for granted a lot of the stuff that's in Blade Runner today because it's been replicated and redone so many times, but Blade Runner, again, 1982, was such an original concept and such an original vision of the future that it still holds up today and is still just a marvel to watch. Now, while I do think Blade Runner: The Final Cut is the best version, I actually don't think Apocalypse Now Redux is the best version of that movie. They added a bunch of scenes that don't really help the movie move along. If anything, it sort of like stalls out in the middle a little bit, but it is remastered and looks incredible. This is one of the best ways to watch the movie, even if it's got a little more fat on it than the original cut. It looks stunning. Scene after scene looks so incredible, and this movie has such a wild backstory into how intense the production was. There's actually a documentary about it called Hearts of Darkness. Francis Ford Coppola started to lose his mind, and also he might have been doing a little too much cocaine, but that's neither here nor there. In this movie, not only him, but Martin Sheen, a lot of the crew really delved into a dark place to create this thing, and that's ultimately what the movie's about. And there's something magical about it that you can't quite put your finger on that makes this thing work better than most movies work. And then you also got some amazing production stories like Lawrence Fishburne. He was actually only 15 when he was cast in this movie, but he lied and said that he was 18. That launched his career, and we know how well that went for him. It is a little grueling to watch because it's kind of a punishing movie. There's so much brutality in it, but it is a genius work of filmmaking. While The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 are kind of regarded as Francis Ford Coppola's best work, I think Apocalypse Now might be his most genius work. Now, while my next pick is not necessarily a genius work of filmmaking, Leon the Professional is an unusually broadly appealing action movie with some iconic roles and moments in it, including what is quite possibly Gary Oldman's best villain, and Gary Oldman is quite possibly one of the best actors to play villains in movie history.
Manny, bring me everyone.
What do you mean, everyone?
I mean, I put him up there with Vincent Price in terms of like Hall of Fame best villains, and Leon the Professional is one of his most realistic yet most chilling villains. You also get this early role from Natalie Portman. She makes it on the list twice. And say what you will about her performance with Leon the Professional, as inappropriate as it may seem, it makes for just some classic moments, and then you do get really fantastic scenes of action that again look and feel real, even if they're sort of scripted as being over the top. Now this is written and directed by Luc Besson, who has done a ton of action movies like The Fifth Element, and his movies can be hit and miss, but I think this one is easily sort of the crown jewel of his filmography. Even though he's done some cool stuff, nothing is as good and again as broadly appealing as Leon the Professional. The moments in this movie are so good. I don't care how many times you've seen this movie over the years, or if you own a copy like I do, it's gonna be well worth just turning on Netflix, because you can spend 20, 30 minutes, hell, you can spend an hour looking around on Netflix. You're not gonna find anything better than Leon the Professional, except for my number one pick, which is easily the most widely known and appreciated movie, not only on this list, not only on Netflix, but possibly ever. But I am gonna tell you some things you might not know about Jaws. So there's so much lore behind the release of Jaws and sort of how many people watched it and how many people got scared out of the water, the fact that it's the first summer blockbuster to ever exist, but that can overshadow how exceptional Jaws actually is. And it's not just good because you don't see the shark till late in the movie, even though that does help, but that was actually done on accident, it wasn't intentional. But that's also part of the magic of what makes this movie work so well. And not just because there's so many good lines like these.
Cage goes in the water, you go in the water, sharks in the water. $10,000 for me by myself. For that you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
They're all gonna die.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Smile, you son of a...
Or great scenes like these. It also tells this story perfectly, right down to the camera work and editing. For example, you maybe never noticed this shot. It seems like a very simple scene, two guys talking to each other, but the camera never cuts away. It's one single shot as they're on this ferry, and I'll speed it up so you can see how the cinematography changes and their position changes as the power dynamics shift during the conversation. It's subtle, but incredibly brilliant and subliminally effective.
You yell Barracuda. Everybody says, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Jaws is full of that stuff. Another example is how the mood in this scene gradually changes from joy to pure dread as Quint tells the story of sharks feeding on men after a shipwreck, which is a true story that they put in the movie, at the perfect moment right before they begin to battle the shark. I mean, that story heightens the fear to an absolute peak right before a lot of the action kicks off. It is absolutely brilliant, and trust me, the movie is packed with stuff like that. I'm just giving you a couple examples because we don't have all day. When you take all those things into consideration, even the accidental stuff, Jaws is quite possibly one of the most perfect movies ever made. I hope you get some more enjoyment out of some movies you've likely seen before. It's my first time trying something like that. This video is running a little longer than usual, so let me know in the comments below, do you like this format? By no means am I moving away from my typical videos, but if you like this one, I may do videos like this again in the future. But that's it for now. Help me thank those Patreon supporters. If you're interested in becoming one, there's a link in the video description. There's also a link down there where you can become a channel member and get access to exclusive videos right here on YouTube. But I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for watching this special Netflix episode, and you will see me on the next one.